22. 16 peers are to be chosen to represent the peerage of Scotland in Parliament, and 45 members to sit in the House of Commons. 23. The 16 peers of Scotland shall have all privileges of Parliament, and all peers of Scotland shall be peers of Great Britain, and rank next after those of the same degree at the time of the Union, and shall have all privileges of peers, except sitting in the House of Lords and voting on the trial of a peer. These are the principal of the 25 Articles of Union, which are ratified and confirmed by Statute 5 and Chapter 8, in which statute there are also 2 Acts of Parliament recited, the one of Scotland, whereby the Church of Scotland, and also the 4 universities of that kingdom, are established for ever, and all succeeding sovereigns are to take an oath inviolably to maintain the same. The other, of England, 5, and Chapter 6, whereby the Acts of Uniformity of 13 Elizabeth and 13 Charles II, except as the same had been altered by Parliament at that time, and all other acts then in force for the preservation of the Church of England, are declared perpetual, and it is stipulated that every subsequent king and queen shall take an oath inviolably to maintain the same within England, Ireland, Wales, and the town of Berwick upon Tweed. And it is enacted that these 2 acts, shall forever be observed as fundamental and essential conditions of the Union. Upon these articles, an Act of Union, it is to be observed, 1. That the 2 kingdoms are now so inseparably united that nothing can ever disunite them again, but an infringement of those points which, when they were separate and independent nations, it was mutually stipulated, shall be, fundamental and essential conditions of the Union. 2. That whatever else may be deemed, fundamental and essential conditions, the preservation of the 2 churches, of England and Scotland, in the same state that they were in at the time of the Union, and the maintenance of the Acts of Uniformity which establish our common prayer, are expressly declared so to be. 3. That therefore any alteration in the constitutions of either those churches, or in the liturgy of the Church of England, would be an infringement of these fundamental and essential conditions, and greatly endanger the Union. 4. That the municipal laws of Scotland are ordained to be still observed in that part of the island, unless altered by Parliament, and, as the Parliament has not yet thought proper, except in a few instances, to alter them, they still, with regard to the particulars unaltered, continue in full force. Wherefore the municipal or common laws of England are, generally speaking, of no force or validity in Scotland, and, of consequence, in the ensuing Commentaries, we shall have very little occasion to mention, any further than sometimes by way of illustration, the municipal laws of that part of the United Kingdoms. The town of Berwick upon Tweed, though subject to the crown of England ever since the conquest of it, in the reign of Edward IV, is not part of the kingdom of England, nor subject to the common law, though it is subject to all Acts of Parliament, being represented by burgesses therein, and therefore it was declared by Statute 20 George II, Chapter 42, that where England only is mentioned in any Act of Parliament, the same notwithstanding shall be deemed to comprehend the dominion of Wales and the town of Berwick upon Tweed. But the general law there used is the Scots law, and the ordinary process of the courts of Westminster Hall is there of no authority. As to Ireland, that is still a distinct kingdom, though a dependent, subordinate kingdom. It was only entitled the Dominion or Lordship of England, and the king's style was no other than Dominus Iberniae, Lord of England, till the 33rd year of King Henry VIII, when he assumed the title of king, which is recognized by Act of Parliament 35 Henry VIII, Chapter 3. But, as Scotland and England are now one and the same kingdom, and yet differ in their municipal laws, so England and Ireland are, on the other hand, distinct kingdoms, and yet in general agree in their laws. The inhabitants of Ireland are, for the most part, descended from the English, who planted it as a kind of colony, after the conquest of it by King Henry II, at which time they carried over the English laws along with them. And as Ireland, thus conquered, planted, and governed, still continues in a state of dependence, it must necessarily conform to, and be obliged by such laws as the superior state thinks proper to prescribe. At the time of this conquest, the Irish were governed by what they called the Brehon law, so styled from the Irish name of judges, who were denominated Brehons. But King John, in the 12th year of his reign, went into Ireland, and carried over with him many able sages of the law, and there, by his letters patent, in right of the dominion of conquest, is said to have ordained and established that Ireland shall be governed by the laws of England, which letters patent Sir Edward Coke apprehends to have been there confirmed in Parliament. But to this ordinance many of the Irish were averse to conform, and still stuck to their Brehon law, so that both Henry III and Edward I were obliged to renew the injunction, and at length, in a parliament holden at Kilkenny, 40 Edward III, under Lionel, Duke of Clarence, the then lieutenant of England, the Brehon law was formally abolished, it being unanimously declared to be indeed no law, but a lewd custom crept in of later times. And yet, even in the reign of Queen Elizabeth, the wild natives still kept and preserved their Brehon law, which is described to have been, quote, a rule of right unwritten, but delivered by tradition from one to another, in which oftentimes there appeared great shew of equity in determining the right between party and party, but in many things repugnant quite both to God's law and man's. End quote. The latter part of which character is alone allowed it, under Edward I and his grandson. But, as Ireland was a distinct dominion, and had parliaments of its own, it is to be observed that though the immemorial customs, or common law of England, were made the rule of justice in Ireland also, yet no acts of the English Parliament, since the 12th of King John, extended into that kingdom, unless it were specially named, or included under general words, such as, quote, within any of the king's dominions, end quote. And this is particularly expressed, and the reason given in the year book, quote, Ireland hath a parliament of its own, and maketh and altereth laws, and our statutes do not bind them, because they do not send representatives to our parliament, but their persons are the king's subjects, like as the inhabitants of Calais, Gascony, and Guyenne, which they continued under the king's subjection.